Dr. Ruth Drown. Dr. Ruth Drown was an early disciple of Dr. Abrams, and she continued his legacy perfecting their equipment and improving detection techniques and healing. Among the improvements, we note the addition of a rectangular rubber sheet. It's possible to use different materials that she called sticky plaque or adherence plate. By entering this rubber sheet in the radionic circuit, she managed to eliminate the healthy subject. The rubber sheet worked as a detection system. At first, she used percussion, but experience showed that there was a reaction in the fingers of the person operating the device when sliding them over the surface of the rubber plate. When placing a hand on a dial of the apparatus and rotating it looking for a signal, the operator reached a receiving frequency. Then the other fingers, while sliding on the sticking plate, felt an adherence at the same time and remained stuck. This sense of adherence corresponded to what was happening with the glass rod that Dr. Abrams used on the abdomen of healthy volunteers. The best thing about this system is that there was no need to receive specific training on the different sounds in the abdomen of a healthy person. Neither the connection of a healthy subject was necessary for using a radionic machine. One single person, without special training, could perceive the adequate vibrational settings for treating a patient on a radionic machine. By placing a drop of blood of a person to make a diagnosis in the circuit and after adjusting the dials using the information being received by the sticking plate, Dr. Drown had some numbers and positions of dials. They corresponded to an individual patient. It was the radionics frequency of the patient at a given time. Then she compared that figure with a reference table where frequencies associated with different diseases. If she introduced in the circuit the necessary medicines to treat the patient's disease, the patient began to heal, even patients who were kilometers away. In essence, the radionics machine consists of an electrical circuit modulated by dials. The sample of the patient was connected and the dials were adjusted to the ill. The remedy was also connected to the device. The patient, through their sample, was connected to a remedy for the disease. From there, the subject started his healing. Note here that the instrument by Dr. Drown was used to compare frequencies taken by experts using rods and pendulums on samples of inorganic minerals. With a radionic instrument, you can take measures for all existing things, even abstract concepts such as ideas or thoughts. The readings of dials from Drown's radionics equipment corresponded virtually with the dowsing of different mineral values. These values in turn matched to their atomic weights. Therefore, Drown's device allows the operator to obtain figures of accurate atomic structures and energetic characteristics of different samples of both organic tissue and inorganic elements. When Dr. Drown thought that the sample of the person kept some kind of connection with that person, radionics went a step further. If the sample from that person is treated, then the person and his body will receive the benefits, she thought. And so it was. She began to use blood samples to transmit through radionics treatments using subtle energy present in medication. The energy vibration from the medicine to cure a disease could be sent away through a kind of resonance, no matter how far the patient was, from 100 meters to kilometers or thousands of kilometers away. The success rate of Drown's team confirmed her theory. However, the scientific reasoning behind the functioning of this device, called radiovision, was not explored then or now. Many argue that in physics, the intensity of any type of electromagnetic energy decreases as the square of the distance from the source. That means that the more remote the source, the energy intensity decreases to a greater degree. So the kind of energy that connects patients with devices and remedies should be different from the one present in conventional types of electromagnetic fields. This does not preclude that this energy can also be channeled through electrical and electronic products. Today, many theorists argue that the subtle energy of the human body works on multidimensional level and connects to all human beings through a kind of primary matrix, which in turn is connected to another part where we can relate to the animals, plants, and even the things through their vibrational fields. Unafraid to investigate, Drown went much further. She connected her radionics equipment to a camera and she obtained photos wherein the other surface of the affected organ or organs of a patient were recorded. Even when what was connected to the radionics was a simple blood sample from the patient. However, she noticed that this type of picture only occurred when she was involved in the process and some of her collaborators. Not everyone that worked with the equipment could get this type of pictures. Some researchers also managed to replicate such phenomena, but it was not something everyone could get. Therefore, it was thought that there was some kind of psychic ability that was wrapped in the upper levels of use of radionics machines. In short, anyone could perfectly use a radionics equipment for detection and therapy, but not for certain achievements, such as pictures of diseased organs at a distance. Currently, the most modern equipment radionics include subtle energy generators in order to facilitate the operator's objectives. In this way, greater certainty and reliability in achieving its aims are achieved. The fact that radionics allows to act on a subject at a distance helps to cure using samples from patients or considers that there are connections invisible through which they can influence someone or something, make it seem more a matter of magic than science, from the point of view of its critical detractors. However, most of these critics have not dared to experiment with radionics devices, and they do not reach clear conclusion that disarm their destructive criticism. Let us note here that there are always people who attack almost any treatment, from homeopathy to Chinese medicine, bioenergetics, chiropractors, those using bioresonance or employing remedies based on naturopathy. Depending on the commercial or economic interest, the persecution of certain solutions is usually more or less intense. The truth is that Dr. Abrams, Dr. Drown, and their disciples managed to cure their patients using radionic devices. However, they were attacked by many who held power in the medical and pharmaceutical establishment. Dr. Drown was accused of fraud and using tools without scientific basis to deceive their patients, so she ended in court. Despite having hundreds of real testimonials from patients who had solved their problems, some of which were incurable diseases according to conventional medicine establishment, Dr. Drown ended up being accused of medical fraud and sentenced to a short prison term. Her instruments were confiscated and destroyed. Her careful notes and written records were also confiscated and destroyed. Important to point out that radionics is still considered like something pseudoscientific and inexplicable from the point of view of its device, sometimes even as a network of toys of charlatans. Many people consider radionics as nonsense, and the Food and Drug Administration, known as FDA, does not recognize any legal medical use for these devices, because not even its circuits may be sometimes functional from the usual point of view. However, in the UK, this alternative therapy is recognized and its practice is permitted. Those who have had the opportunity to test the efficacy of radionics in therapy also support it. Also, the radionics machines go far beyond the purely medical use. In fact, it is used very effectively for personal development, sports, goal achievement, agriculture, to improve properties in food and beverages, animal health and pest control, to vast fields, etc. Most people who use the radionics are cultured and open-minded people determined to check the reality of things by experimenting. They are individuals not linked to commercial interests or corporations. They are individuals who use relatively inexpensive means to solve problems and improve their lives and the lives of many people. Dr. Abrams was prosecuted for renting his equipment and generating recurring income from its use. Would people pay for something useless again and again? None of his patients sued him for fraud. The same happened to the Dr. Drown and other researchers in this field. They always were sued by established powers and not by the users themselves who benefited from this type of unconventional therapy. Another controversial researcher was Wilhelm Reich. Disciple of Freud, he developed theories about the human psyche and how to achieve balance through the release of frustration or energy armor. He studied the life energy he called orgone energy and explained that this energy could be obtained from some device and accumulated. This energy could be used to improve the physical condition of a person, perform healings, or used in various forms of personal development. He came into contact with Einstein to validate his equipment and discoveries. The latter found that there were unexplained changes in temperature produced by his devices, but later ruled out further research. His works were banned and destroyed by the FDA. Wilhelm Reich ended up in prison where he died. Years later, radionics devices were combined with advanced orgone generators, or chi energy generators, that offer a very interesting and powerful use for all types of targets. It is important to mention another researcher named T.G. Hieronymus. The success of this man was due to his avoidance of standing out with their equipment and eliminating, as far as possible, the word radionics and many other controversial terminologies that would attract too much attention. This made one of his devices eligible to be patented, although described as a device designed to detect and measure emissions of materials, both organic and inorganic. The apparatus had the adherence plate or detector plate, typical of radionics machines. He used a prism of mirrors to reflect the energy that was not electrical in nature but could flow through circuits and cables, as his predecessor had advocated. Hieronymus wanted to show that it was possible to transmit the vital energy, according to him a kind of subtle energy in sunlight, through cables, and this energy was essential for living things. As already mentioned earlier in this book, he put a metal plate on the outside of a home connected with a wire to the basement where he placed 2 pots with seeds. The cables were introduced in one of these little containers and the other pot kept disconnected to serve as a control sample. The pot with seeds without cable could only grow a few seeds and very weakly. The container connected to the plate allowed the development of healthy plants with a bright color. Both pots were in the dark and were also watered. This experiment was repeated by others who gave validity to the test. Hieronymus considered the eloptic energy, so he called, was part of the solar energy and could show both the characteristics of electricity, for its ability to be transmitted by wire ropes, and the characteristics of light, since plants need the photosynthesis of chlorophyll using the light in the visible spectrum. The photographs in radionics serve to transmit subtle energy remotely in the appropriate healing frequency to a patient who is not present. Even the patient doesn't need to know that it is benefiting from this powerful transmission. This fact invalidates the theory that radionics only act as a placebo level. In addition, you can also treat animals or plants with results that are sometimes quite spectacular. Expressed another way, it is possible to make changes in subtle energy levels at a distance on humans, animals, plants, and even in certain circumstances related to groups. Having said that, we should consider whether it is ethical or not to treat a person without their consent, even when the family sees fit. Many radionics therapists refuse to perform actions without the express consent of the person who will help. Moreover, the idea that if radionics can be used to help a person to heal or to improve conditions, then could also be used for the opposite also arises. Hieronymus always tried to avoid this possibility, fearing that the military and intelligence forces employed radionics in a negative way. Some sources pointed out at the time that both the Soviet Union and the United States engaged in a secret psychic warfare in which both countries tried to negatively influence the other nation's personalities. According to these same sources, these specialists were trying to, at the same time, to keep their people in good condition by counterattacking the attacks of the opponents by means of radionic devices. Hieronymus showed that in the right circumstances, the appropriate use of photographs with radionic devices could give exceptional healing benefits. However, since the use of radionics for healing purposes was banned in the United States to be used on human beings, the researcher chose to address their research and development of radionic devices with discretion and guiding it to less controversial issues. He directed his studies to treatment of diseases and pests on crops. It should be mentioned that another pioneer, Curtis Upton, had already adapted one of Abrams' devices for the use in the detection and treatment of plant diseases. The researcher found that he could diagnose and treat abnormal growth by introducing a leaf of plants affected in his radionic device or by simply placing in it a photograph of plants, crops, trees, or fields for planting. To continue with Hieronymus, in the 60s of the last century, an engineer named Ed Herman Thomas asked Galen Hieronymus to demonstrate radionics on an infested tree by caterpillars in his garden. Thomas and his devices were more than 500 kilometers from the diseased tree, which otherwise had been treated with pesticides and fertilizers without results. Hieronymus requested a photographic negative of the tree, he could also use a photograph, some parts of it, and several of the caterpillars who were killing it. After having sent the required items, Herman waited several days for a treatment outcome. One afternoon, when returning to his home, he was pleasantly surprised that the diseased tree was literally surrounded by a carpet of dead caterpillars that had come off of it. A month later, it was recovered and lush. Hieronymus and Upton devices were very effective in agriculture. They eradicated pests and improved crops. There were new companies that used radionics for these purposes with great success, and the farmers contracted them because they were very competitive and serviceable. The client would take aerial photographs of the crops requiring treatment, and these were introduced in radionic devices, which the company had. Devices were also supplied to farmers. Through these devices, vibration of a particular chemical harmful to insects attacking the plants was sent. All the treatments were done using the pictures or samples of plants and at a distance. One of the companies involved in this type of treatment, Homeonic Research Foundation from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, only charged for its services if they could eradicate the pest. This sort of business involved zero risk for the farmers, but was very successful for the company because the results were spectacular. But pesticides companies got into dispute with the goal of eliminating competition, Homeonic Research. They finally achieved their purpose, accusing radionic operators of fraud, even though the company only charged for results as already mentioned. The main problem that both Hieronymus and their radionics colleagues had to fight was the refusal of renowned scientists of the time to get involved with them and certify the results. So finally, the lobbies of the industry managed for radionics to officially cease to be used in the fields of United States of America. The enormous distances are not an obstacle to radionics. Note that Thomas G. Hieronymus kept working and experimenting with radionics. It is very interesting that a researcher made psychological measurements of the astronauts of the Apollo mission, Apollo 8 and 11, sending them to NASA. Most measurements made nearly 385,000 kilometers away from the planet Earth over the bodies of astronauts matched well with measurements performed constantly by the space agency over their men. Nevertheless, NASA was barely interested in the phenomenon and showed no interest in how Hieronymus had access to so much information on the basis of simple photographs of the cosmonauts.